The land was a faded parchment beneath a silver sky. Wind whispered like an old hymn through the brittle grasses, and the trees, what few remained, stood like widows on a battlefield. The earth had gone quiet, not dead, just ... waiting, and through that hushed stillness, a lone rider moved like a ghost. He wasn't much to look at anymore. Once, maybe broad-shouldered, strong-jawed, sure in the saddle, but time and sorrow had carved deep into him. His coat was torn at the hem, the leather split and waterlogged. His boots bore the story of many hundreds of miles, and his eyes, well, they bore the rest. They were the color of wood smoke, dark and distant, as if still watching a fire that had long since gone out. He didn't ride with purpose, not anymore. His horse, a tired sorrel with a gimpy rear leg, seemed to choose the path as much as he did. Some days he rode east, some days west. The sun always rose. The sun always fell. He never stayed long enough anywhere to tell if anything else mattered. But that morning, with a storm crowding the hills and the smell of snow on the air, something shifted. He crested a rise and saw it, a sliver of chimney, smoke curling into the pale sky, faint, fragile, real. He blinked twice to be sure. He wasn't imagining it. That's when the wind picked up, not wild, but bitter. It cut through him, through the seams of his coat, through the wool of his shirt, the sort of wind that knew how to find the cracks in a man. He nudged the horse forward. She whinnied, once, uncertain, but she obeyed below. The land fell into a wide hollow cradled by trees, and there it stood, a homestead. It wasn't much, just a timber house, low-roofed and long, with a barn half-hinged at the side, and smoke whispering from a stone chimney. No livestock in sight. No fences freshly mended. Just the quiet mark of life continuing, stubborn as roots in winter. He thought he might knock. Ask for water. A place to warm his hands, but his knees buckled before the thought was finished. The snow had begun to fall, light but certain, and the last thing he saw was the blur of a figure moving toward him fast, strong, unafraid. Then darkness. When he woke, it was to the low creak of a rocking chair. The ceiling above him was old pine, hand-hewn, low-beamed and honeyed with thyme. There was a scent of stew in the air, thick with thyme and potato. His hands twitched. A quilt, patchwork and heavy, covered him chest to foot. He wasn't alone. Boots clicked against the floor, gentle, unhurried. Someone stood in the doorway. Arms crossed. She was tall, not by inches, but by presence. Hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up to the elbow. Her eyes scanned him like she'd seen 100 men in worse shape and knew not to flinch. Her voice came quiet. You took your time waking. He opened his mouth, but the words were stuck in gravel, water. She handed him a mug. Clay, not glass. Handmade, he drank. And for the first time in what felt like years, he felt heat that didn't burn. They didn't ask his name, not that day, not the next. The women, 6 in total, moved through the house like a single body, each with her own rhythm. One chopped wood, another stirred pots, a third hauled water from the creek with shoulders that looked like they'd wrestled stone. There was an older one, silver-haired, always reading by the window with spectacles perched low. A quiet girl, hardly more than 16, swept floors and hummed tunes that seemed older than the walls. The 6th, she stayed near the barn, wore gloves even indoors, rarely looked him in the eye. They didn't ask who he was, or why he'd fallen at their fence, or how long he meant to stay. They fed him, gave him a cot in the storeroom, and they watched him like one might watch a broken horse, not cruelly, just knowing the way damage can show up when you least expect it. By the third day, he was on his feet. He tried to leave, saddled the horse, made it 10 paces. The youngest girl stood in front of the gate with a bowl of soup and said, "You forgot." This, he looked down at her, at the steam curling between them. "I don't plan on staying," he rasped. She shrugged. "Still gotta eat." He stayed. He worked, not because they asked him, because he needed to. He mended the fence post where he'd fallen, sharpened the saws, cleaned the ash from the chimney, fixed a broken step without a word. The older woman nodded once when she noticed, didn't smile, just nodded. They gave him bread that night, fresh and warm and slathered in real butter. He hadn't tasted anything that good in years. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in violet and rust, he sat out on the porch sharpening a knife, not for hunting, just to keep his hands busy. The one who stayed near the barn came out. She didn't speak, just leaned against the post, arms folded. Watching the trees, he glanced at her gloves, leather, thick, stained with something darker than dirt. "Been here long?" he asked, his voice low and rough. She nodded. "Since I stopped running." He looked out toward the dark horizon. "What were you running from?" She looked back at him, and her voice was steady. "Men like you." Silence. Then her boots moved. Her shadow faded into the barn-light dot, and he didn't blame her. That night he dreamed of fire. Not the kind that warms. The kind that takes a woman's scream, a child's cough, the sound of wood collapsing. He woke with his hands shaking, eyes wet, the cot damp with sweat. The quiet girl stood in the doorway holding a candle. She said nothing, just placed a folded quilt by his feet, then left. The wind howled that night, but he did not feel alone. They didn't call it a ranch. They didn't call it anything, really, just home. The house sat in a hollow where the wind dipped low and the light took longer to leave. The porch ran wide across the front, and beyond it, 6 sets of boot prints, braided through the dirt, each one as distinct as a fingerprint. The man, the drifter, learned to read those prints before he learned their names. The small ones moved fast, playful, skimming between chores. One tread was slow and heavy, always near the woodshed. Another barely touched the earth, like she walked with half her weight in thought. One stayed near the barn, hard-set heels, never in a hurry. And one never walked alone. She always left 2 sets beside her, like memories or ghosts. They did not welcome him with open arms, but they did not shut the door either. That was its own kind of grace. He began to rise early, not from duty, from habit. Before the sun touched the windows, he was up, boots tied, hands aching to do something. Not to earn a place, just to feel again what it meant to be needed. One morning, the eldest woman, grey braid, flannel sleeves, handed him a tin pail without a word. He followed her to the chicken coop. She showed him the feed, the quiet way the hens preferred their corners, the signs of a sick one. She didn't speak much, but when she did, it was only what mattered. He listened more than he ever had before. That night, there were 3 fresh eggs in the skillet. He didn't ask if they'd been saved just for him. The youngest girl was the first to see him. She couldn't have been more than 16. Barefoot in spring mud, hair tied in loops with faded ribbon, she moved like the house was hers, and she belonged to it more than the walls did. One afternoon, she perched on the fence where he was mending wire. She didn't say a word for a long while. Then, finally, "You don't smile much." He paused, set his hammer down. "Ain't been much reason to." She nodded. "Then you ain't been looking." And she jumped off the rail and walked away, trailing laughter behind her like smoke from a sweet fire. By the end of the second week, he knew their rhythm. They woke with the birds. The house came alive, not with voices, but with motion. The scrape of chairs, the rustle of aprons, a teapot, beginning to hiss. Each woman had her place. The sharp-eyed one, tall and watchful, handled the livestock with the quiet dominance of someone who'd broken more than animals. The bookish one spent afternoons by the window, pen scratching into worn journals, her face painted by sunlight. And secrets. The one with the gloves rarely came inside before dusk. He learned she once doctored animals, maybe people too, but something had gone wrong. The gloves never came off, even for bread or soup. He didn't know their names. Not yet. But he knew their burdens by the way they moved. That was enough. One rainy morning, he fixed a shutter that had been banging loose since the night he arrived. No one thanked him, but later he found an extra slice of pie at his place, on the table. Another. Morning, he caught the water bucket before it tipped. The girl who always spilled it stared at him, cheeks red. The next day, she left half an apple on his windowsill. Nothing was spoken. Everything was said. He found her in the barn. One afternoon, the one who didn't like him, she was wrangling a mule with a coat like thunderclouds. The beast kicked and spat and reared, but she stood firm, one hand on the bridle, eyes steady as riverstone. He leaned on the post and watched, not to intrude, just to see how one quiet woman could silence a storm without ever raising her voice. When the mule finally bowed its head, beaten by calmness, she glanced at him. "You ever handled one of these?" she asked. He nodded. "Long time ago." "Then don't just stand there." He stayed the rest of the afternoon. No talk, just work. And when the light turned gold, and the air thickened with hay, and the hush of dusk, she handed him a piece of bread from her coat pocket. It was dry, crumbly, but warm. It tasted like something holy. That night, the rain drummed soft on the roof. The house smelled of cedar and boiled beans. He sat by the fire while the youngest girl braided her dolls. Hair on the floor, and the bookish one read something aloud. A poem, he thought. He didn't catch the words, only the sound. Like honey poured slow for a brief moment. He forgot the fire that had burned his old life to ash, forgot the smoke in his lungs, the screams in his ears, the ruin behind him. All he knew was this: he was warm, he was dry, he was inside. The next morning, something shifted. The quiet woman, the one with the gloves, passed him in the hallway. Her shoulders were tense, her hands full of herbs. She said, low, "Spring brings all sorts. Some ain't as harmless as you." He looked at her. In the eye, there was a tremble beneath her strength. Not fear, a warning. "Should I go?" he asked. She paused, then shook her head. Not yet. The youngest girl braided flowers into his horse's mane that day. The mule let him brush its flank without kicking. The window by his cot now stayed closed, shutter fixed. None of it was love. Not yet, but it was the beginning of something that might one day deserve that name. The snow came in late that year. Not a blizzard, not a storm, just a steady hush that fell from the sky like the earth had drawn in a long, deep breath. Drifts rose slow against the barn wall. Fence posts grew hats of white, and the sound of the world softened inside. The hearth never stopped glowing. The women moved through the house like songbirds through branches, never still, but never hurried either. The rhythm of survival, yes, but also something gentler, a kind of peace, and in that quiet, he stayed. He took to rising early still, before even the coals had warmed. He'd carry in the wood, check the mule, crack the ice from the water buckets. Sometimes, if the wind wasn't too sharp, he'd just sit by the porch post and watch the dark turn blue. One morning, the quiet woman, the one with the barn eyes, stepped out beside him, handed him a cup of something hot. He took it in silence. She sat on the stoop without asking, boots muddy, hair tied back. For a long time, they just drank. Then, as the light warmed the fields, she asked, without turning her head, "You've always been quiet." He thought for a while before answering. Double quotes, "No. Once I was loud. Once I laughed too hard, talked too much, wanted too much." She nodded, sipped again. Then what happened? He didn't say fire, didn't say loss, didn't say guilt. He just said, "Then I learned to listen." She didn't ask more, but she stayed there a while longer, shoulder brushing his coat, sharing the stillness like it was a meal. That afternoon, she taught him to make bread, not because she had to, not because she needed help, because some things shouldn't die with one person. The kitchen was warm, window fogged, the table dusted in flour. She worked without words at first, measured by touch, not by scale. He watched her knuckles press into the dough like she was kneading memory, not flour. "Bread's not just bread," she said finally, voice low. "It's a kind of remembering. You feed the yeast from what came before." He looked at the starter, cloudy, bubbling in its jar, like keeping a little bit of yesterday alive. He said. She looked at him, truly looked, and nodded later. They shared a slice still warm from the oven, butter softening over the crust. No talk, just bread and silence, and something slowly blooming between them. Not desire, not yet, but comfort. The kind that doesn't ask, just stays. One night, as dusk turned the window panes to mirrors, the girl with the ribbons tugged at his sleeve. "Come on," she said. "Show us." He blinked, startled. "Show what?" She pointed to the guitar by the hearth, dusty. "For years, you hum when you chop wood," she said. "Real soft, like a song you forgot halfway." He tried to protest, but the older woman looked up from her chair and simply said, "It's time." So he picked it up, fingers stiff, voice hoarse, but the notes came, low, simple, a tune from his father's tongue, old as cattle trails and canyon wind. The firelight flickered across their faces. The youngest girl curled up on the rug. One of the women closed her eyes. The one with the gloves stayed in the doorway, her shoulders softening just a little. And when he finished, there was no applause, only quiet, only home that night. The woman from the barn left a loaf of sourdough on the table with a knife set beside it. No note, no words, just a gesture, an offering as winter deepened. So did the roots between them. He learned the names of the goats, the cracks in the barn's western wall, the way the quiet woman tucked her braid into her collar when thinking hard. She learned his silences, knew when they meant to leave me be and when they meant stay close. And for the first time in many winters, he dreamed not of fire, but of hands, small ones, reaching, pulling him home. One morning, a hawk cried high overhead, and the oldest woman set down her teacup. "Spring's thinking about us," she said. But no one smiled, because spring meant decisions, departures, change. He felt it coming, like hooves on a far ridge, and still she stayed near him. The barn woman, the bread maker, the one with calm eyes and strength that didn't need proving. She never flirted, never leaned in just so. But once, while showing him how to clean seed from chaff, their hands brushed, and she didn't pull away. That was enough. One evening, as snow softened into sleet, he stood in the doorway watching her work the saddle straps. "You all always lived here?" he asked. She nodded. "Most of us came from pain. Found each other one by one, built what we needed." He looked down, and me. She looked up. "You're still building." He didn't speak for a while. Then, "I'm not used to being seen as worth keeping." She stepped closer. Not touching, but near. "Maybe it's time you changed what you're used to." That night, for the first time, he slept without dreaming. Asterisk. The first letter came with the Thor dot. It rode in on a stranger's horse, a boy no older than 16. His coat too big, boots too small, and eyes that darted like a Colt unused defenses. He didn't stay long, just handed the envelope and rode off without a word, his trail melting behind him. The women didn't gather to read it. They didn't have to. The letter went to the woman with the gloves. She read it once, folded it neat, and set it in the fire without a sound. But smoke tells truth, and so did the stiff line of her shoulders. By sundown, the kitchen was thick with silence. No singing from the youngest, no hum from the rocking chair. No one reached for the second slice of bread. She finally spoke. The quiet woman, the one with dirt on her boots and scarred hands folded in her lap. "He's coming." She didn't say a name, but from the stillness that followed, it was clear they all knew. She looked to the others, then to him. "He wants land," she said, "or a name tied to it. I wouldn't give him either." No one spoke. Then the bookish one, her voice steady, though her pen trembled, said, "He's the kind who thinks kindness is weakness." The girl with the ribbons looked afraid for the first time that night. The rancher sat alone in the barn, sharpening a blade he hadn't touched in months. He wasn't thinking of violence. He was thinking of how many times he'd been a coward in the past. How many times he'd turned away. How easy it was to ride on. But here he had eaten bread baked by calm hands, slept beneath roofs patched by resilience, watched laughter bloom like lilacs from mouths that had once only known silence. And now the storm was coming for them, and he was still here. He offered to go, meet the man before he reached the hollow. Not to fight, he said, just to ask him to turn around. The women disagreed. Some wanted to hide. Some wanted to run. The one with the gloves said, "Men like him don't listen to soft voices." But the bread maker, the woman with storm-tamed eyes, said, "Maybe. He doesn't need a voice. Maybe he needs a mirror." So he rode alone past the split rail, down the gulch, through the thawing cottonwoods and out into the hills, where the grass had only begun to stir. He met the rider near the river bend. The man was dressed in black, tall in the saddle, coat crisp, eyes like polished stone. He wore the confidence of someone who'd never been told no and didn't plan to start now. "You here to speak for her?" he asked, voice dry as dust. "No," the rancher said. "I'm here to speak for myself." The man smirked. "You ain't law, no." He said again, "But I've seen what she's built, and I've seen what men like you do to it." The wind picked up, tossing snow like ashes between them. The man leaned forward. "You trying to stop me?" The rancher didn't move. No, I'm asking you. A long silence followed, then a snort. I take what I want, the man said. Always have. The rancher finally looked up. Not angry, not afraid, just steady. You took enough from the world. Leave this place be. The man turned his horse without a word. No promise, no threat, just gone. And sometimes silence is a kind of surrender. When he rode back into the hollow, the women were waiting. They didn't run to him. They didn't cheer, but one by one, they walked back into the house and started cooking again. Like nothing had changed, but everything had. That night, she came to him, the bread maker, the one who had taught him how to knead patience and bake with memory. She found him, by the porch, whittling again. A small figure was forming in his hands, not perfect, not polished, but hers. She stood there a while, hands in her coat. You didn't have to, she said. I know. Why did you? He looked at her, and the words came like old rope pulled from deep water. Because I don't want to be the man who leaves anymore. Later, under the stars, they stood close, not touching, just close enough to feel each other breathe. He looked at her, eyes darker than night, but warmer than fire. You never asked my name, he said softly. I didn't need it, she replied. He smiled, then slow, worn, real. I'm tired of running. She looked up, then rest, and so he did, not by sleep, but by staying.